Funeral home directors. What is the weirdest thing families have ever done at a funeral? Not a funeral director, but my family had what some may call weird funeral for my dad. So here's the story about my dad's going away party. My dad had always said when he died he didn't want anyone to be standing around being sad. Instead, he wanted a party. My dad died unexpectedly and we threw him a hell of a funeral. Except we didn't call it a funeral. We did call it a going away party. It was held on a Sunday in my parents' backyard on a warm December day. There was a keg of his favorite beer and 3 huge bottles of his favorite bourbon. Everyone had to wear jeans and a t-shirt because my dad hated dressing up. If someone wore a collared shirt, they were given one of my dad's t-shirts to wear. Everyone drank and told stories about my dad. At one point, we almost had 100 people in a backyard with a drink in their hand to toast my dad. The going away party also featured a huge bonfire and fireworks. And yeah, people still tell me it was the best funeral they ever went to. Story 2. Weirdest thing a funeral home director has done for me. My father's funeral had to be on my birthday, so the funeral home actually made me a birthday cake. It was a very kind gesture, but I was so grief-stricken that for like a week afterward, I genuinely thought it was something they did for everyone. Your loved one died? You get a cake. Honestly, not a bad idea to soften the blow. The world could do with a bit more cake, and hey, I say this as someone who's allergic to most of them. Story 3. I do pet cremations, and sometimes we do witnessed cremations where the family can be present for everything or sit in a conference room and watch TV while we take care of their pet. It becomes a memorial for their pet, and it's usually very sad but very sweet as they say goodbye. Once we sat and waited until the pizza that the dog's owners had ordered arrived, and they placed it into the casket that we used to cremate the dog because he always liked to eat pizza. I had a guy take off his shirt and put it in the casket because his dog liked to sleep on his clothes, so the guy left half naked. A family brought their 2 still living dogs in and picked them up to smell their deceased brother. That was so the dogs could say goodbye. Story 4. I am a funeral director. Weirdest involved lawyers and lawsuits and multiple restraining orders, and I can't talk about it yet. It'll be in my book if I ever write one. Odd, though. I had a service for a young man who died from a reaction to synthetic marijuana. Basically, it triggered a seizure, he threw up, fell face down, and suffocated. Parents come in and they aren't typical grief-stricken adults who lost a child. Rather, this is a perfect time to argue and fight with each other, loudly. The director handling arrangements is quickly overwhelmed, instructs them to calm down, and they refuse. They start screaming, she threatens to stab him, and he says he'll shoot her. Director runs away and calls the police. Police show up and remind these two they aren't allowed within several hundred feet of each other. Court-ordered separation. They argue with the officer, end up arrested, and off they go. And they do not come back. We're stuck now. We have remains, and nothing we can do about it. We call a lawyer and a private investigator to track down the next closest thing this kid has to a relative. Finally get a hold of a grandparent, and once the body has passed into legally being abandoned, we contact them. They apologize to us for the situation, authorize a simple burial, and we do all the funeral disposition portions at no charge, just to get away from our predicament. The grandparents own cemetery property, so they allow him on the family plot. Months go by, almost a year. Eventually, the parents of this child get out. We don't see them, but the grandparents warn us. It's important to note that our funeral home also runs a couple of cemeteries. At night, the phone lines for the cemeteries get forwarded to the director on call. So it's 2:30 a.m. I get a call from a sheriff's deputy. The parents were fighting in the cemetery. The sheriff is pretty sure the mom grabbed a shepherd's hook, iron post meant to hold a flower basket, and stabbed the dad. He's covered in blood, but it's not serious. And he won't talk to us. The deputy says, I'm going to cite them for trespass and dump them downtown, but I need you to sign. I go to the cemetery where their kid is buried, and no one is there. I call him back. Maybe he'd already left. No, he's at XYZ Gardens, where I am. He wants to get going, etc. Their son is buried at ABC Gardens. The line is quiet. So you're telling me these 2 stupid mother effers don't even know where their goddamn kid is buried? Yes, sir. They'd apparently gone to a cemetery, found a grave with a headstone with a relatively similar name to their son's, and proceeded to trash the site and fight, never noticing the grave there was for a 90-plus-year-old, not their junior high school-aged kid. Story 5. Obligatory, not a funeral director, but at the funeral of a good friend's elderly relative, the family had requested that her coffin was brought into Bryan Adams' ballad, Everything I Do, famously from the Robin Hood Prince of Thieves soundtrack. Unfortunately, There was a miscommunication somewhere down the line, and as the pallbearers solemnly entered the chapel, the song that blasted out over the PA was instead, I, however, cannot comment on whether the deceased was loved by the good or indeed feared by the bad. Story 6. My aunt live-streamed my grandfather's funeral on Facebook a few days ago. Her intentions were good, as it was for myself and the rest of the grandchildren that couldn't make it, but something felt weird about it. She didn't even tell us ahead of time, so I just randomly got a notification saying she was live from the funeral. Story 7. At the short graveside service for my mother had a regular funeral earlier. The intent was that the kids, grandkids, etc. would each place a rose on her casket. Then the casket would be lowered into the ground. The rose part went as planned, but the casket got stuck partway down. Pretty soon there's one guy with a large board cranking away at the end of the casket, while another fellow was jumping up and down on the top of it, all with the family members cheering them on. My wife yelled, "She just wanted one more guy to jump on her before she went." When they finally got it down into the hole, we gave the gravediggers a standing ovation. It was like something from a Mel Brooks movie. My mom had a good sense of humor and would have found this abandonment of social standards quite amusing. A couple of dozen people there, nobody got video. I got lots of photos at least. OP, are you sure that wasn't just an omen? Was she alive in there? You should have checked. Story 8. Not a director, but my uncle is, and I was helping with the funeral. The church that the funeral was at only had street parking. Halfway through reading the eulogy, a parking enforcement officer walks in and walks up to the stage. They took the mic as the speaker was finishing and told everyone they had to move their vehicles or they would be ticketed and towed. Story 9. Me and my family are all white and very southern. At my grandmother's funeral, my uncle, her son, showed up in a cowboy hat, boots, and a belt with the words, "N-word, baby," stamped into the leather. I don't even understand what the hell it means, and really can't comprehend how he thought it was an appropriate belt to wear to his mother's funeral. Story 10. Not a director. However, my coworker's aunt passed away, and he chose me out of everyone in the office to attend the funeral. Everyone went around just kind of stating facts. How tall she was, how many acres of beet farm she had. It was weird, but it got worse. After his brother showed up late and parked his car halfway into the grave site, my coworker grabbed a shotgun, flung open the casket, and fired 2 rounds into it. I booked it out of there. This sounds like a reference to something. I just don't know what. Story 11. Not really weird at a funeral, but funeral director related. We had a pretty close-knit group of friends, and one of us was a funeral director. He decided to get out of the business and sold his practice and building. A month later, 2 of our really close friends died in a car accident. If he still had his funeral home, their bodies would have likely gone to him. It was hard enough on him as it was. I don't think he ever would have recovered if he had to take care of them and their services. I'm so glad he got out of the business when he did. But given that context, the weirdest thing I've ever experienced at a funeral home was grilling burgers and watching UFC. Story 12. My granddad had a cool funeral. He was a huge Queen, Freddie Mercury fan, so the hearse drivers played the greatest hits album in the hearse all the way to the crematorium, really loudly with the windows open. They were smiling and laughing all the way. They told us they'd had great fun singing along. As the coffin went down at the end of the service, we played Another One Bites the Dust. Lots of laughter as people left. We all went back to the pub. Everyone had a Bacardi and lemonade as their first drink, which was my granddad's tipple. Then back to my parents for one hell of a party, dancing the night away to Freddie. Story 13. I've seen a lady pull their stillborn baby out of a coffin, hold them for 10 minutes, then have to be blocked so they didn't run away. What I also find weird are people that bring in a band and have a big song and dance. So many people like to show off their family at funerals. And I'm usually weirded out by just how many families are messed up and how many cobwebs get opened up during the grief process. Oh, and a full-on interpretive dance in front of the coffin. It was stuff of legend. I don't actually see what's so weird about a big song and dance. It's not the typical North American funeral vibe, but I don't know, it's maybe another culture's thing. I gotta admit, I am not the most knowledgeable about other countries' funeral practices, but a big song and dance sounds pretty typical, actually. Just not North America. Story 14. Not sure if this counts. My ex's family were funeral directors. His mom told me a story once about the county attorney, one of the richest men in the little town. His first wife passed of cancer. She had a lot of dental work done prior to the illness, and all of of it was done with gold. The attorney asked for the gold to be cut out of her teeth so he could sell it at one of those cash for gold places. My ex's dad did the work. He was a combat vet from Vietnam and had seen many terrible things in life, but he said that he almost quit that day due to the senseless mutilation of this lady's body, all because this already rich man wanted to get richer. Story 15. Obligatory, not a funeral director, but I am hopefully starting mortuary school next semester. I had a friend in high school who was a lesbian, but she had gotten pregnant during an experimental tryst with a man. Unfortunately, her pregnancy was not one of the best, and she partied and hung out with the wrong crowd a lot, even at 8 months. She was in a passenger seat when someone was drunkenly driving home in a packed car from a party, and the car crashed into a canal. Everyone escaped the car and drunkenly walked home, failing to call the cops, and not realizing she was still trapped inside. She died by drowning 8 months pregnant, trapped in the car, and her body wasn't recovered for 3 days. Her funeral was closed casket due to the stage of her body's decomposition. Water plus 120-degree weather is no bueno for corpses, but for some freaking reason, the unborn fetus was pulled out of her, and they had an open casket for it alongside hers. It was very strange to unexpectedly see a tiny casket alongside hers and walk up to it, trying to make sense of what I was looking at. It honestly looked like a piece of mangled dried wood, and it was pretty flooring that the family would ever want that. Either way, I understand families grieve differently, but what truly annoyed me was everyone's morbid curiosity about the fetus. A large, very large amount of people paid their respects to the fetus and completely forgot to pay their respects to our friend because her casket was closed. There was also the subject of her whole extended family, like 15 cousins, just talking and laughing non-stop during the service. Some of her friends made out in the seats and felt each other up, and notoriously, the baby daddy and her lesbian lover argued on the phone. The funeral service was a complete circus due to being comprised of mainly 14 to 17-year-olds. I felt terribly bad for the adult family. I cannot imagine being the parent here. I would probably be furious. Like, these people indirectly or kind of directly were the cause of my child's passing. In a horrifically stupid way, too. I wouldn't want to see their faces at all, personally. Maybe I'm just a spiteful person, but I don't know. And then to have them disrupt the service, like be loud during it, feeling each other up at a funeral? The kids are not alright. Story 16. Not a director, but my 9th grade English teacher told us about her dad's wake. Apparently he was a real prankster, so in his will, there were to be 4 kegs of beer that people could enjoy that would be taken care of by funds he had set aside. Unbeknownst to guests of the wake, he made sure he only paid for 3. So the people at the service would have to pick up for the last keg, which was around $200 if I remember. Story 17. Not a director, but when my grandfather was dying in hospice, I would sit at the foot of his bed and rub his feet because he would complain about them being cold. And at his viewing, I stood by the foot of his coffin with my mother, accepting condolences, thanking people for coming, etc. I went to tuck the blanket at the bottom of the coffin because I had brushed it by accident, felt his cold feet, and started rubbing them without thinking. I got a lot of weird looks before my cousin came over and asked what I was doing. Story 18. I think I've mentioned this someplace before, but at my father's gravesite service, my aunt, my father's sister, gave a very long, very rambling, and inappropriate speech about how this will affect her and how the rest of us will never understand. Then she walked up to her parents' gravestone next door and dumps a bottle of whiskey on it, interrupting my dad's service as much as she could and doing everything possible to make the tragedy about her. Story 19. I wish I was there. I skipped out, but my dad told me that some visiting priest, pretty sure he was not a real one, from some Latin American country where Mexican Americans pulled my distant relative out of her casket by the arm, claiming he could raise her from the dead. No one asked him to try. Her organs were harvested and blood drained. Even if he could, what kind of vessel would he bring her back to? They had to beat him off the corpse. Oh, OP, no one told you? The funeral homes offering resurrection services? Yeah, pretty new, pretty horrifying. Goes against the will of God. Cool. You know how it is. Story 20. Not a director, but when I was a kid, one of my aunts passed due to a pretty gruesome accident. At the wake, one of her sisters enticed a fight with the other sister, which included a full-on fist fight, hair pulling and denture removing to avoid damage. I was ushered into the lobby with the other kids the minute my one aunt took her teeth out. The poor funeral director could only just stand there in complete and utter shock while the two duked it out, and all of us kids could see it even though we were in the lobby. Story 21. Obligatory not a funeral director. I did not get to witness this since I had to leave before the final viewing. At my wife's grandmother's funeral, my wife's aunt, who is one of the worst people I've ever met, like seriously, there's no way she's not severely sociopathic, and we all believe she's the reason my wife's grandma went down the drain so quickly. Anyway, I guess at the end, someone started to recite the Lord's Prayer, and my wife's terrible aunt just goes into an insane coughing fit the second they start. It was really bad. They describe it as deep, visceral coughing like she inhaled pepper spray. No way it was fake. They keep going with the prayer, and the second they stop, she stops coughing. My wife and her dad look at each other like, what the hell? TLDR, wife's aunt, confirmed demon. Story 22. This is going to sound weird and unbelievable, but I have to recount this tale. They wanted a private moment with the deceased. We allowed it, and all our staff cleared out alongside the pastor. Within about 5 minutes, we hear retching and dry heaving. We knock and ask if everything's all right, but the retching doesn't stop. So the staff enters the room, and by God, I'll never forget the image of what I saw. They were eating slices of the body, embalmed slices. God knows how toxic it was. The adults were arrested for desecration of a corpse, and the children went into foster care. These were some sick bastards. Story 23. Not a funeral director, but New Year's Day, January 1st, 1987, I lost my best friend growing up due to an unexpected accident he suffered walking back to his campsite after celebrations. We were only 16 years old at the time and were already regular weed smokers. The day before the wake, we all went to the funeral home for one last session with our bro. Must have been around 12 of us in there, and we smoked the whole place out for about 2 hours with his favorite music blasting. We gave him about 100 shotguns to help him on his journey and a few dozen big joints. The owners just closed the doors and let us be, God bless them. Every New Year's, I smoke one out for my bro. Even though I'm not a regular anymore, I really miss him. Story 24. Not a funeral director, but I have a story that fits pretty well here. I was at one funeral where the widow got up to thank everyone for coming and talk about her husband and how much she loved him. It started to get awkward when she went into detail about how he died and how she helped prepare the body, shaving his face and cutting his hair. She then went on to say that since many of us in attendance didn't know them when they got married, she would reenact their wedding vows for our benefit. She proceeded to do so, with a friend joining her to speak her dead husband's lines. The cringiest part was when she slipped the wedding ring onto the finger of the corpse and kissed him. Not a little peck, full on wedding day. Ugh, yikes. I still can't even think about it. Oh, I'm all for individual processes of grieving and all that, but I don't know. If someone told me this was their plan, I would give a few really hearty, "Are you sure?" You know what I mean? Something about this just doesn't feel quite right. And by something, I mean kissing a corpse. That's the big one, I think. Anyway, that's the last story for today. I'd like to thank you all so much for watching. I'm glad this one wasn't as sad as I expected it to be. Anyway, have a wonderful day or night, wherever you are, and I will see you in the next one.